Alrighty. We'll give everybody just a minute to catch up. Hopefully the sound quality is a little better tonight. We had a clicking issue. It was like a latency issue or something a couple nights ago. So hopefully we got that. Hopefully we have that cleared up. But anyway, welcome back. Welcome back. I appreciate everybody who took part in the Sunday experiment. We had a nice series of videos. Feel free to go back and watch it, read the comments section, and most importantly, please share this show with your friends. We do post the long form on both YouTube and Rumble. So that way there's a record. You can go back, you can watch it, all the great stuff we talk about. Any comments or interjections you want to add to the show, you can drop in on the TikTok page or go ahead and leave a comment on YouTube or Rumble. I really appreciate how quickly the community is growing, how we grow. This is how we develop empathy and we learn to have conversations with each other. Because even though it is Vince versus everyone, we are all in this together. And, that's what it's all about. We're all learning about each other and discussing ideas. Sometimes we get heated, but we can still all be part of the same community and try and make these things better. Because even though we don't always agree on the solutions, we do agree in a lot of ways when we identify the problems. And that's what we're here to do. So, anyway, I want to talk about a recent story. I put this in the headline for tonight. In a recent TPUSA event, I'm not sure if you guys saw the pictures of the practically empty stadium. Apparently, doors opened at initially the doors were supposed to be closed at 4 o'clock, but they kept the doors open for an extra hour, and still an almost empty room for the vice president, J.D. Vance, for a TPUSA event that Erika Kirk canceled. Well, at least her own appearance was canceled at the last minute. She cited threats to her safety and said it wasn't a good time. It just wasn't a good time for her to be there. And I have personally some serious questions. How is an event not safe for Erika Kirk, but somehow like the vice president's still like good to go? And this does have like an obvious answer. TPUSA, they are a non-governmental entity. They have to pay for their own security. So if they feel like those security costs are going to be too high, then obviously they're not going to pay to be at an event that's going to have some heightened security risk. Where obviously the vice president, his security is paid for by our tax dollars. So maybe they just felt like they weren't going to have those same cost balance issues if the Secret Service was the one providing the vice president's security detail. There were a lot of questions about this event, though, and not to get too conspiracy brained. I mean, I'm basically going to give you the Twitter sphere take. This is not a personal endorsement. This is not my personal opinion. This is just what we're reading on X. We're just talking about the going conspiracy theory for this. And basically, it goes something like this. If you've been paying attention to JD Vance in the last year and some change, you'll have noticed kind of a through line, right? JD Vance has been positioning himself as the populist leader, right? He was kind of naturally positioned to take over the MAGA mantle for Trump now that we're in the sunset of Trump's presidential era, his presidential saga, as it were. And Vance is in a unique position because, like Trump, he was not a politician before achieving this high office. Vance, he was a tech bro. He had his book, Hillbilly Elegy. And he talked about growing up at grandma's house and problems with his mom and drug addiction and the welfare state as it relates to West Virginia. And just this sort of unique perspective that's not very typical because a lot of these people in these middle states or places like West Virginia, they feel largely forgotten by the government. And in a lot of ways, it's true. I am sympathetic to that. But Vance himself, what is he? A Yale law school graduate. Again, he was in this sort of venture capital space with Peter Thiel, with Larry Ellison. So he has this very strange sort of pedigree and this kind of concocted background that he's able to fall back on, where if on the surface he kind of looks like he could be that people's champion the way that Trump was viewed in 2016, but as you start to dig beneath the surface, it kind of feels like a reality TV show Manchurian Candidate sort of thing. So he has a way of sometimes giving people the heebie-jeebies when they pay a little too much attention, right? And JD, in this last year, he, again, because he has this unique populist thing going on with the right, he's forced to contend with the most obvious question for somebody in that position. Same, in many ways, the same as Trump was. He was literally asked point blank, how do you feel about Nick Fuentes? How do you feel about the Groypers? Do you disavow these people? Do you disavow these groups, these white nationalist, white racial identitarian politics? And in no uncertain terms, J.D. Vance disavowed this person, this group, and this is not surprising. This is a socially and politically toxic environment. And again, I'm not saying that, these people are totally unjust in some of these grievances. I think in a lot of ways they definitely need to touch grass. I think racial identitarianism is something that's detrimental to our body politic, not beneficial. Somebody like Fuentes is able to kind of leverage this in the social media space, but his grievances aren't necessarily related to that. In a lot of ways, he actually calls out things like Fuentes himself even said that immigration was becoming a white racial grievance issue as opposed to like an actual political platform. So kind of weird when you listen to the what's said about these people versus what they are actually saying. But in no uncertain terms, Vance disavows these people. And yet, at the same time, very recently, Vance has been kind of walking back a lot of the Trump immigration. Well, Trump kind of folded on immigration in so many ways, and Vance is doubling down on the original promise. He's saying that they still have a lot of work to do to fulfill those deportation quotas. He's cited some successes that they've rolled back legal immigration in a lot of ways. So even though the Trump administration catches flack for some of this H-1B stuff, for student visas, he points out that they've actually been very restrictive, but that's still a little bit of gamesmanship if we're being honest, because immigration got so lax during the Biden era. You can roll it back to the George Bush levels, which is still pretty high based, compared to the way that Trump and Vance have talked throughout their political careers. That's still higher than the perception they were given, but much, much less than what we saw during Biden. So you can just put things back to normal and call it an overwhelming success. There's a lot of numbers and a lot of game theory going on there, but they're trying to play this as a win right now. And then at the meantime, Vance has been he kind of intentionally distanced himself from the Iran war. He didn't even get involved in anything with the Iran war until it was time to talk peace, and spearheaded the peace talks, kind of positioning himself, even within the administration, positioning himself as the anti-war guy. And then while he's positioning himself and jockeying for that anti-war position inside of a war administration, you have people on the right trying to pit Vance and Rubio against each other as if they're going to be running against each other in the next presidential primary. That Rubio has this neocon hawk position, return to the George Bush status quo for the Republican Party, and Vance is somehow a political outsider, even though he's the VP. This is if you are into politics, if you like politics in a way that it almost has replaced pop culture, this is reality TV. This is curated narrative, extravaganza. This is House of Cards level writing, but the terrible reality is that we all are actually living through it. It's not Kevin Spacey's not going to get fired next season. That's the terrifying thing. So while this is going on, the Twitter sphere, the X sphere, the conspiracy theory is that Vance has now pissed off the donors, specifically Miriam Adelson and Larry Ellison and Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. that because Vance is not leaning into the Iran war, and because Vance is not leaning into the rollbacks on immigration restrictions, that now Vance is somehow upset the powers that be. And because TPUSA is also beholden to these donors, but in a bigger way, because they require these donations quarter after quarter, not just once every 4 years, that now we're seeing that Erika Kirk basically stood up Vance at this TPUSA event, that it was a coordinated hit job to make the vice president look weak, to leave him with an empty room and nobody there. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's up to you to decide. I'm just presenting the narrative. To me, I think that's, I don't know, that almost requires a little too much, or as they say, this theory proves too much. It would be far too intentional, though at the same time, I mean, TPUSA has been kind of a weird organization, and nothing's really happened since the death of Charlie Kirk. It does make you wonder, like, are we intentionally crashing the right-wing populist movement into the ditch right now? I mean, honestly, like, nothing's happened other than like Tyler Robinson got arrested. There's been no other arrests to some coordinated effort or other people who are providing material support or intel as it relates to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. There's not a lot happening. There was no crackdown on the left. I mean, we had the Signal group chat in Minneapolis that was cracked during the ICE protests. But I mean, if you look at the reporting from Andy Ngo, Andy Ngo is saying that there's a left-wing terror organization operating from Texas through California all the way to the Pacific Northwest. He's linked this group to several political murders throughout the country. And we have not seen any arrests. We've seen arrests of some individuals that committed these assassinations, but we haven't actually seen any arrests on an organizational effort to carry out these heists, to carry out these killings. So it does make you wonder if this is being allowed to go on, and it is. There was carte blanche on September 11th of last year, the day after Charlie Kirk died. There was an opportunity that the right wing could have absolutely cracked down on their political opposition, and I think there would have been very little resistance to that. You might have seen some of the more fringe left kind of band together, and that would have only added fuel to the fire. But instead, they did nothing. They allowed Candace Owens for months to claim it was anything other than obviously the people who freaking did it, and say, oh no, it was an international group. Oh, it was our greatest ally. Oh, well, it must have been the French Foreign Legion. And what about the water towers and the Egyptian planes? And we had all these crazy conspiracy theories, even though we literally had a string of text messages between Tyler Robinson and his boy girlfriend who, like, absolutely clearly he was doing, Tyler Robinson did this. His motives were incredibly clear. And then to make matters only slightly more complicated, if you looked at the social media and Discord feeds from these two people, it was clear that there were way more people involved in actually pulling this off from a material support level. And yet, nothing happened. That conversation's completely gone. And in fact, I'm surprised I was able to finish that phrase, that whole spiel, before TikTok actually took this video down and instead said, no, you have to assume that Erika had something to do with it. Because that's what actually gets you clicks and views, is saying that no, his own wife did it, and not this person who was incredibly clear about their incredibly clear motives after literal years of threats for the, killing Charlie Kirk on this exact onus. So anyway, rant over. Sorry. Jeez. So, obviously things are very broken. And this leads into the second thing that I want to talk about, which I did a short version of this, but I don't think I made my point very clear in the 1-minute video that I just uploaded to my TikTok page and YouTube and everything else. Here's the thing. Our public school system is, maybe they're not 100% to blame for why things are the way they are in the American body politic right now, but the reality is that they are a major contributing factor. And I want to walk you through this. Close your eyes and remember your public school days. All of the information that you are given is a teaching to the test type of environment. That the information that you are given, you are expected to memorize and then just regurgitate. You don't get extra points for thinking about this information critically. You don't get extra points for thinking about how what you learn in science class may relate to what you learn in history class or English class, how English literature, it might relate to the history of a region or people. You do not get bonus points for thinking in this way. What you get instead is actually you get criticized. If you start thinking about how, like, hey, wait a minute, these things that you're saying here don't actually, the things that I'm learning in history don't seem to line up with the narrative I'm being given from this book in my English literature class. Why is that? What's happening? Why is that? You don't get, not only do you not get extra points for that, if you had a particularly egregious teacher, you might have gotten kind of put in the hot seat for that because you're, 15, 16 years old. And now the teacher's got you standing in front of the room. You're just thinking out loud. And now you're expected to what? Give a dissertation on why the book thief doesn't make sense when you look at Cold War history. And you're just on the spot. It's like, yo, dude, I'm like 15. I don't have any experience in public speaking. I haven't had any time to actually think or rationalize these things. I'm just saying that these two things don't really fit together. And instead, you might have gotten put in the hot seat for that. And for the rest of your life, you're going to remember not to do that and don't think that way. You've been constantly rewarded for just accepting the curated facts that coincidentally fit nicely together. And you don't get any bonus points for trying to link these facts together. Now, you are an adult. You may have conditioned yourself to just forget things after the test. And plenty of people did. They showed up, they got their B or their C or even their A, and then they just kind of out of their head. Those people are nowadays kind of apolitical. They see stuff in their social media feed, they have an emotional reaction, and then, a few weeks later, it just turns out it's time to vote, so they vote based off of that emotional reaction. They don't really have to critically think about these things. Or there's the alternative. You are a person who you passively absorb this information and you remember it well. You see it on the news, or maybe you're not a news watching or a news reading person. You're the kind of person who's scrolling social media feeds and you fall down the Candace Owens, Erika Kirk rabbit hole. And you start seeing these things like Egyptian planes and you commit that information without ever later realizing that that's bullshit. Or you start hearing about the French Foreign Legion and water towers and you commit that information without ever following up again. And you start to connect these dots and you do start to form a narrative and you make sure that you insulate yourself from any contradictory information. You cannot have it. You cannot have it. And so you become the kind of person who, whether it's the official narrative from the news anchor or whether it's some conspiracy theory thread that you found from like Data Republican or Candace Owens or DC Drano or Jack Posobiec, it doesn't matter because you are the kind of person that when you get that information, you unintentionally, subconsciously start filtering things out and only committing information that confirms your priors. And you never will take a moment to re-examine your position and the facts and try and figure out in the middle of all this noise and all this propaganda, the truth is going to be necessarily somewhere in the middle. And when you start acting this way, it makes you a very tribal person politically, socially. It means that you have to insulate yourself. You're going to be uncomfortable dealing with people that think differently than you or have different political opinions than you. When you are asked to elaborate your opinion further, or when you are asked to follow these ideas to their logical conclusion, not only will you struggle to do that in a meaningful way, you'll probably begin to react very emotionally and verbally, almost violent. That by being asked to expound on these theories or ideas, that you not only will you be made uncomfortable, you will be made angry. And then that will be the onus to say, you know what, I just don't like talking to that person anymore. We used to be really good friends, and then one time he asked me, he kept talking to me about the public school system, and he kept pressing me. Well, why are we talking about money? What about outcomes? What about outcomes? And he just wouldn't let go of the outcomes thing. And to be honest, I just didn't like that anymore. And now we just don't talk. It just makes me upset every time I speak with that person. And you start having more and more of these types of reactions. You filter out who is in your circle and what you're allowed to talk about and what things you like. And when that happens, you necessarily end up in a balkanized state. And this is why whenever the last election is a really great example. If you're from Virginia, the last governor's election, if you are, or just on a national level, maybe politics aren't your thing like that. The last presidential election, I can promise you, if you lived in a mostly Democrat area, if you lived in, say, I don't know, a more urban area in Pennsylvania or Pittsburgh, you'd say, how the heck did that guy win the popular vote? It's impossible. I don't know a single person who voted for him. Or how did Abigail Spanberger win the election in Virginia? I don't know anyone who likes that lady. Duh. Of course you don't, because you choose where you live. And very likely you and your neighbor have a lot more in common politically or socially than anything else. So of course you don't really know anybody, because you choose to work in a place and you choose to live in a place. And when you're choosing these things, you're choosing the things that are more similar to you. And so when you see that, oh, well, it was, she just barely won, or in Abigail Spanberger's position, she won by 15%. You say, how is that even possible? I don't know anyone who voted for her. Of course you don't. Of course you don't, because why are you're probably intentionally not talking to people who would. And you can spot this on a cultural level. Even my wife, she jokes on me a lot. I am a political animal. She says that, oh, you just don't like them because they're liberal. And it's no, you're wrong. One, most of my very best friends are liberal, because they are the people that I can have the longest, most interesting conversations with about politics, because we disagree. If you ever talk to somebody who just agrees with you on everything, it's really boring, because you're already on the same page. What do I need to talk to my dad about the public school system for? We kind of agree. Well, I don't know. Actually, public school is a bad example, because I don't think he has the same gripes with it that I do. But yeah, what am I going to talk to my dad about politics for? We already agree on a lot of this stuff. Like, you'd struggle to find places where we depart, except for maybe the public school system, where, like, if I talk to one of my coworkers who moved into town from Pennsylvania, well, we have a completely different upbringing, totally different perspective. This guy worked on campaigns. Like, we can talk all day. Because even the marginal differences for us, even when we come to the same conclusion, it's for entirely different reasons. It's so fun. It's ridiculously fun, and I get to have all this fun, and I feel like so many other people miss out, and it makes me sad for them. And now, while sometimes me and this person, we keep it professional. We both know what we are, and so we go into these conversations knowing that sometimes they're going to end badly. And then we walk away, and there have even been times where I've in a conversation, I walked away, I got a water, a cup of coffee. 15 minutes later, I come back, and we're standing there, and I was like, "Hey, man, I kind of lost my cool." He's like, "Yeah, because you were wrong." I was like, "I just got a lot to think about." That is what it is. It's fun. This is how we learn. This is how we grow, and this is how we make a better community for all of us. And again, I guess the last thing where I'll leave this off, right? You can't be a lemming. You have to learn to have these conversations if you want to be successful. If you want to live in a community, you kind of have to build it. And part of that is understanding that you're going to be wrong sometimes, or sometimes you're going to be right and be unable to convince people, which is also, again, why you need to get active in the comment section. The more that we debate this, the better I am at arguing this stuff. Your criticism only makes me stronger, or more moderate. If you're really good at arguing, you might moderate me some, which is also fine. But as we do this and we build, the one thing that you can always remember, and the one thing you can always look forward to, even a candidate like Bernie Sanders in 2016, this is a great example. There were a decent portion of Bernie Sanders supporters who voted for Trump, and the election data in 2016 shows this. And the reason that this happened is because while Bernie and Trump had a completely different idea about the solutions, Bernie Sanders identified a lot of problems. And Trump was able, even after Bernie dropped out, to continue talking about solutions to those same problems. Because at the end of the day, I'm just a normal guy. I'm not a politician. You're likely just a normal person. If you're a politician, you need to give me some of these roses so I can get the live goal thing done. But if unless you're a politician, you don't get to decide what the solution is anyway at the end of the day. So if we can identify the right problems together, then maybe the best solution will just present itself, and we can find out what the best solution is by using the logic and reason. And unfortunately, because we all grew up in the wilderness, we had to teach ourselves to use those tools like logic and reason. All right, I think I can leave it there. I feel like I stuck the landing. Please follow, like, share, subscribe, comment, tell your friends. Vince versus everyone on all platforms: Instagram, X, TikTok, YouTube, Rumble. I'm here. And when I say I'm here, what I mean is I'm always here for you. You're not always here for me, but I'm always here for you. So you can make it up to me by liking, sharing, and telling your friends. And if you do that, then we'll just call it even. Thanks, everyone.